Okay, so this evening's topic is the Australian Aboriginal rainbow snake. And just to introduce it, instead of going over the vast anthropological ethnographic literature on the rainbow snake, I'm going to try and keep things very simple by reading out a rather lovely summary from a children's book of Aboriginal Australian myths, which we can hand out. Because everything here is just put in a beautifully compact form. And as I read it out, I'll perhaps go through some of the statements. The rainbow serpent is the principal culture hero among the Aborigines of North Australia. So you could say that it's, insofar as they have divinity or God, it's this snake, which is also a rainbow, and which the Aborigines will also refer to as our all-mother, the mother of all of us. So it's a snake, a rainbow, an all-mother, and actually quite a few other things. The serpent is both male and female, thus embodying certain aspects of the mother womb and father phallus. So that's very important. It's gender ambivalent. Sometimes in the pictures the rainbow snake has got breasts, other times when it goes erect it's just a vast penis, phallus, reaching up to the sky. But in all the different accounts it's ambivalent. It's never strictly female, never strictly male. As the regenerative source of life, the rainbow serpent is responsible for the renewal of all creatures, great and small. And many of the accounts have described this principle of renewal as the principle of cyclicity. It's the principle of life constantly turning into death, and vice versa, and death turning into being followed by resurrection. So the logic of the snake is this movement between life and death. Whatever dies is going to come alive again in some maybe different form after a while. And in particular, it's responsible for the renewal of the landscape and, of course, of all the game animals, as well as the people. It lives in water holes and is also responsible for the creation of rivers at the time of the dreaming. The Aborigines revere this spirit being above all others. Cave walls throughout the north are daubed with its image. And in fact, they've dated some of these images of the rainbow snake to 11,000 years back, to the time when the great, towards the end of the Ice Age, with the melting of the ice caps, massive floods were separating what was then Greater Australia into Papua New Guinea and what's now mainland Australia. And the serpent certainly goes back at least that far, at least 11,000 years. I would argue it goes back a lot further. So you see these beautiful pictures. Sometimes it's undulating lines, sometimes the snake's a concentric circle, sometimes the snake's got ears. But we have these rock engravings and sometimes paintings. Right, cave walls throughout the north are daubed with its image, and major ritual cycles embodying the feminine aspect of the great snake are performed each year in its honour, these being made up of hundreds of songs, many dances and a host of stories about the serpent. So the major occasion for reenacting the rainbow snake and getting swallowed up in this all-womb is the snake is a swallowing monster, really, and it's the all-mother. And everyone comes out of the womb, so everyone comes out of a part of that snake, but during initiation you get swallowed up again, and you have to be reborn from the snake. So initiation is the core ritual that makes the snake real. People act out the snake, and you actually become one with the snake in this womb before as a kind of death. But this death is hopeful because you're in the womb of the All-Mother, and soon you're going to be born. And if it's an initiation, it means you're being born for the second time. Participating in these rites is for boys an important step on the way to fully initiated adulthood. Broadly speaking, the great snake is regarded as female among the tribes of North Australia. In the desert regions and in the Kimberley of northwest Australia, the rainbow serpent takes on a more specifically male aspect, though in all cases, gender characteristics remain ambivalent. Its sexual duality means that in many regions of the country, the rainbow serpent is also known as the Great Mother, or Kunapipi. As Kunapipi, she is believed to have created men and women, determined their kin groups, their totemic affiliations, and given them the sacred law. Her incarnation is the incarnation of the eternal feminine, which unfolds in the history of humanity as the history of every individual woman. So every woman in Australia is one of the manifestations of this All-Mother, because she herself is or will become a mother, but therefore part of this collective womb, if you like, of all women. The rainbow serpent is nearly always associated with water. I would say always, not nearly always. It is never. I don't think I've never come across a single case of dryness or fire or drought giving rise to the snake. It's always the other way around. It's the floods and the rains which give rise to the snake, or maybe the snake's been dwelling all along in a waterhole. But the dry season, or the fires which accompany the dry season, mean the drying up of the water, and therefore the disappearance, the retreat of the snake. So the snake's always powerful in proportion as it's wet or mixed up with great floods and tides and so forth, and maybe storms. So ancient is its lineage that it predates the many-breasted Diana of Ephesus, the goddess Nut in Egyptian cosmology, and the Indian goddess Kali. In the great snake, male and female are united. Her avid womb attracts the male and engulfs the phallus, which then resides as a potentiality within herself. So one of the key points I think about the rainbow snake is that we're seeing a very familiar image. We're seeing the dragon from our fairy tales in Russia and Europe, of course, but also Korea, Japan, China, right around the world, the plumed serpent, of course, in South America. So most of us are familiar with this, possibly the most powerful image of magical myths and fairy tales, this snake which has got wings, the dragon. But if you really want to understand what that dragon is, it's best to go to the one part of the world where the dragon, until very recently at least, certainly until the 50s, this dragon was acted out. It happened. You know, it wasn't just a story. There were plenty of stories about this dragon or snake, but the stories weren't just disembodied. Through ritual action, you brought the snake back into powerful life on a periodic basis. The rainbow serpent's invisible presence is often associated with the sound of the bull roarer, a length of wood attached to a cord and whirled around the head, which is said to send forth flashes of lightning like the tongue of a snake. So you have these, we can easily make these things. We've often made them ourselves in RAG when we go on our field trips. You get a piece of wood about this long, flat, make it oval. Best to put lots of wiggly lines and concentric circles on it. And then you have a piece of cord to one end, and maybe a stick, but you whirl it around your head. And it's best to have about 50 of them. And it makes a woo, 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 woo roaring sound. And it's been said it sounds like an aeroplane engine in your living room, or maybe it sounds like the roaring of a wounded dragon deep in some cavern. But the Aborigines will say it's the sound of the blood. And it actually, when you hear a sound like that, woo, 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 you realise, all right, I've been here before. You're in your mother's womb, you're hearing this woo, 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 woo heartbeat sound. It's like the sound of the blood. But of course a rhythmic sound because of the pulse of the blood when you're in the womb. So what happens is that men will whirl these bull roarers around, make this terrifying sound, and as a result of that, people know, right, we've got to do something now. The rainbow snake is hungry, it wants blood, it wants to eat some boys. I'll maybe go into all this later on. But when the boys are going through the most terrifying part of their initiatory ordeal, they're hearing this sound of the blood while at the same time being smeared with blood. In one depiction of the rainbow serpent myth, Jungawal, who, like Kunmangu, is the masculine aspect of the great snake, engages in incestuous activity with two of his sisters at the time of the dreaming. This is a really important feature of the dragon and the rainbow snake. There's plenty of sex which happens, but it's never marriage. And symbolically, for the Aborigines, it's invariably incest. You're having sex with a sister or brother in accordance with their classificatory system, so that you might have a few thousand sisters or a few thousand brothers. It doesn't mean necessarily what we would mean by a brother or sister, not a direct, intimate, close brother or sister, but somebody classified as a sister or a brother. So the snake has sex, and if you think about it, think of the stories about dragons who have to be rescued by some patriarchal hero to make the world safe for marriage and the family. The maiden has always got some prior relationship with this dragon, and maybe the hero has to chop the head off the dragon, or maybe it's got lots of heads and have to chop them all off in order to release the young woman from her prior intimacy with this dragon. And then the hero, if he's lucky and wins this battle, he's allowed to marry the princess or whoever it is. So marriage takes the place of that previous relationship. But the earlier relationship certainly wasn't marriage. It was kind of intimate and maybe sexual, but it was not marriage. So dragons never do marriage, and there's a really good reason why they never do marriage, but they do plenty of sex, which isn't marriage. So where are we now? Okay. So he engages in incestuous activity with two of his sisters at the time of the dreaming. He regularly places his hand in their wombs in order to draw forth the ancestors of the Aborigines so that they may populate the land. So in this particular story that's being referred to here, Jungle, you have the story of these two sisters, the Jungle sisters. They're kind of goddesses. They're goddesses, female, but they kind of act like males. They have, for example, extremely long clitorises, which they pull along the ground, and these clitorises make wavy patterns in the sand. And the two sisters in this particular story have their younger brother with them, and they ask the younger brother to help them by putting the clitoris inside their womb, and also by having sex with them. So the two sisters have sex with their younger brother, and in that way they get pregnant. But they don't just get pregnant in an ordinary way. They get pregnant with hundreds and hundreds of people in their bellies, and they move from place to place. And as they stop at a place, a whole bunch of babies come out who seem to be grown up almost from the start, and populate this area, and then they move somewhere else, and a whole another bunch of babies. So this is the story. So we have these females, goddesses, but they themselves are gender ambivalent, and we'll see that they themselves, when they start combining intimately and closely, they morph into the form of the snake. So the snake's a composite image made up of these gender ambivalent women. As a culture hero, the rainbow serpent acts as a bridge to the realm of the dreaming itself. The dreaming is a metaphysical condition wherein the world was created. Aborigines acknowledge that prior to this moment the world was without form, was in fact a flat, featureless plain. Culture heroes like the rainbow serpent emerged from the earth to begin the process of world creation, and so created Australia. So in some of the myths which I document in my book Blood Relations, we find this. I mean, first of all, perhaps to say about the dreaming. The dream time is the time of beginnings, but it's not cut up. So rather like with the Bushmen that Chris Lowe was talking about, you have two creations. You have first creation, and you have second creation. The literature doesn't quite use those terms for the Aborigines, but you can see immediately it's the same thing. Dream time is first creation, and dream time is the time when everything's merged. So the land is merged with the sea, the earth is merged with the sky, males are merged with female, and humans are merged with animal. So it's all a big sort of splodge in the dream time. But what happens is that separation occurs, and this kind of moves into second creation. So what happens is that at a certain moment, and in the Weberlake sister story, which hopefully I'll be able to read out, it's a kind of crime, apparently, allegedly a crime. What happens is that a flow of blood separates male from female, human from animal, earth from sky, and so forth, and creates the divisions, which. It's James. Oh, that's good. Fantastic. Oh, fantastic. So what happens is that instead of this blending of all the opposites, you have the polarization of reality into earth and sky, male and female, human and animal, and so forth. And actually it's really hard to find any creation myth in the world which doesn't make that point, that something had to happen to separate the sexes, separate the species, separate earth from sky, and so forth. The dreaming, however, is not an event that occurs in time. According to the Aborigines, the dreaming is ever present. Men and women participate in it each time they enact the sacred rituals. So you don't have the idea that things happen in a long sequence. You have instead the idea of the dreaming as the eternal present. What you bring origins, if you like, if you want to think in anthropological terms, okay, what's the origins of human language? What's the origins of religion? For the Aborigines, there's not really much of a problem about that, because you can make origins happen now. You can go back to origins, because every time you perform your rituals, you're doing origins. You're constructing the logic of culture, kinship, language, setting up these oppositions. You're doing origins, if you like. The rituals don't just reflect something which did happen in the past, they're making it happen in the here and now. So the distant past is brought into the present by the ritual performance. According to the Aborigines, the dreaming is ever present. Men and women participate in it each time they enact the sacred rituals. Lalan or Alcheringa, the Aboriginal words for dreaming. These are obviously, if you have so many different words, but the Alcheringa is a Central Australian term. These words both mean the time of ancestors. Thus the dreaming describes that pristine moment when humankind enters into a stage of self-consciousness while preserving a sense of the ever-renewing nature of life itself. So the kind of reflexivity which is unique to humans, we think, seeing yourself as another, again, that's part of dividing yourself from others and male from female, and making all these other cuts in what used to be a continuous reality. All of the many Aboriginal myths recorded the world creation by the culture heroes celebrate the events of the dreaming. The entire continent of Australia is one vast storyline, being a series of narratives that detail the progress of the rainbow serpent across the earth. That's actually a very important point there. We think of a story, you tell a story, and of course your story is stretched out in time. You can take 2 minutes to tell a story, it might take 10 minutes, it might take half an hour, it might go on for a few days telling different, parts of the story, sequence of the story. But in Australia you do that, but you also measure your story in miles, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles. They have a spatial dimension, and that's because you know the stories are true. And how do you know the stories are true? Well, here is this great cleft in the rock where the great kangaroo woman fell out of the sky and split the rock asunder. These two great massive shapes here, those are the two Wawalek sisters who turned into stone at the end of the story. So there's no argument about the truth of these stories. You've actually got the evidence of the stories. Here's a river which is formed by the rainbow snake as it cuts through between two bits of land and let the sea flow in. So there's no doubt about the stories being true, because here's all the evidence all around you. But in order to tell the story, you have to make that journey. You have to move across the landscape in the way that the ancestral sisters or other culture heroes did. And what happens is that a different Aboriginal ritual group will have religious ownership over a stretch of territory. It's not private ownership in the way landlords would have with a fence around it. It's a religious responsibility for a whole section of the landscape, but it has a boundary. So in order to tell the story, you make the journey as the ancestors did, and you do the correct rituals at the different water holes and increased sites and ravines and so on where the events happen. But you reach a boundary and you have to stop, because the people who've been guiding you up to that point have got no right to tell the rest of the story, which is maybe across the river or across the boundary. So they have to negotiate with the next bunch of people. And then they, assuming you don't make a mess of the negotiations, you can then carry on. But now under the sponsorship of a different ritual group. And these territories are called in the anthropological jargon estates. You have an Aboriginal estate, which is a kind of religious concept of ownership. But in principle, you can go moving across hundreds of miles, maybe up, think of how wide Australia is, well over 1,000 miles. In order to get the full story, you've got to actually make that journey as the ancestral beings did. And that's why the stories are not just long in time, perhaps, or short in time, but long or short in terms of miles as well. And these are often, Europeans have called these song lines. There's a book called Songlines, not a very good book actually, but I mean, by Bruce Chatwin. It never really gets near an Aborigine, so you don't really hear lots of rumours about them, but it's an interesting book. Anyway, songlines are this idea that the memory of the people is preserved in these stories, which are also, of course, songs. They're not just told, in sort of monotone, and they stretch right across the whole of Australia. The whole of Australia was crisscrossed with these songlines, because it was really important for the Aborigines that they didn't. I mean, if they had private property, if they'd had like a territorialism, they'd have died, because the rains didn't and the kangaroos didn't recognise those boundaries. So unless people were good at exchanging space by offering in, inviting in neighbouring groups to celebrate when your particular area might be very rich in, say, witchetty grubs. Might have had a lot of rain recently and the grubs are everywhere. Well, in order to make sure that the witchetty grubs are plentiful in the future, you have to perform the witchetty grub ritual, which you can't do on your own. All kinds of other people have got to come to your area. So the right to property, if you like, is kind of property, religious property, isn't the right to use that property for yourself. It's the right to make a gift, if you like, of the resources to others, whether it's witchetty grubs, kangaroos, emus, or whatever. You have a massive system of exchange closely bound up with these stories. So the entire continent of Australia is one vast storyline, being a series of narratives that detail the progress of the rainbow serpent across the earth. It is possible to follow one of these storylines and so recreate the dreaming for oneself, provided, of course, that one is in the company of an Aboriginal elder who can sing the songs along the dreaming track. When he says can, he's got to have the right to sing those particular songs. Otherwise, you're in big trouble. You sing somebody else's song without permission. Not a good idea at all. Very dangerous. At another level, of course, Kun Mangur is a genuine avatar. Not only has he helped to create all that appears in the world as a figure from outside the world, but he's also responsible for the creation of Aboriginal value systems. Beneath the surface of the great snake's often paradoxical activity, we see the generation of tribal ethics and values. In this sense, he is avataric. Not quite sure what that word means. Children are introduced to the reality of the rainbow snake at an early age. More often than not, they are taught its fearful aspects, so that when they attain the age of puberty, they know their encounter with the great snake during initiation ceremonies will have a powerful effect on them. In a sense, the great snake represents the invisible aspect of deity made manifest. So that's quite a good, as I say, children's story. This book is a collection of children's stories, Aboriginal myths, designed for children. And I think that James Cowan, the editor, does a reasonable job capturing what the rainbow snake is in a nice, simple way. Now, probably the most famous myth in all of anthropology, the myth which has been recorded in more versions and perhaps more discussed than any other single myth that anthropologists are aware of, is called the story of the two Wawalak sisters. And I managed to collect, I don't know how many, about 53 or something versions. But I was doing my PhD, and my supervisor at the time happened to be somebody called Phil Burnham. And he brought me into his office after I'd nearly finished my PhD, and he said, "Chris, you can't possibly write about menstruation. No one ever writes about menstruation. What you've got to do is you've got to pretend you're an Australian ethnographer." And I said, but Phil, I haven't got any money, no one's giving me any resources, I can't go out to Australia. No, just write as if, Chris, as if you're an Australian ethnographer. So I spent a year, and in those days you could pretty much read everything. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but these days it's even harder than it was in the 70s to read everything. But I tried to read everything there was about Aboriginal Australian kinship, systems of ritual and myths, and, in the course of that, came across more and more of these versions of the story of the two Wawalak sisters. Probably the best version is in a wonderful book called A Black Civilization, by Lloyd Warner, who was really a sociologist but kind of came to Australia and did some pretty good ethnography. I think it was actually James who was saying that the ethnography never really told us very much about the detailed day-to-day life of the Aborigines. It's all rather formal, ritual, mythological stuff, but still wonderful stuff. So that's the version I'm going to read out. And it does take a bit of time, I'm afraid. It's quite a detailed story, and I hope we've got time to finish it. But it's and maybe I will have to sort of jump a few bits. I think it takes about 15 minutes to read. So it was the time of Bamun, the mythological period, when Wonga men walked about and modern men had not yet appeared. Everything was different then. Animals were like men. Those two Wawalat sisters had come a long distance. They were coming from the far interior to the Arafura Sea. They had come from the far interior Kardao country. This is a clan territory of the Dua moiety. So just to explain that thing, the Aborigines across the whole of Australia have an extraordinary system of territory. And in northeast Arnhem Land and much of Arnhem Land, your territory is like here, 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 but it's like a chessboard or a draft board. Think of a draft board where you've got black squares and white squares. Not very square, by the way, funny shapes. But if you're Dua, you belong to this half, if you like, that we're called a moiety. But your territory, your Dua territory, is here and here and here. You can step onto it, but you must never step onto Eurythia territory, which is the opposite. That's not yours. So it's a transspatial concept of territory. It's, your territory is spread out across space, and it's kind of everywhere, wherever this system prevails. Anyway, the two moiety names are Dua and Eurythia, and the colour of Dua is blood, or deep red ochre, and the colour of Eurythia is more close to white or pale yellowish kind of ochre. And Dua is the more ritually powerful moiety, and you inherit your moiety through the male line. So if you're if you're born Dua, your father must be Dua, your sons will be Dua, and it's inherited that way. So these sisters, as they move across the landscape, they must keep to Dua because that's their moiety. They had come from the land of the Wabalak people, for Kardao is their country. The Wurkul, a young woman who's not yet had a child, was pregnant. The Gungman, a woman who has had a child, carried her own baby under her arm in a paperbark cradle. It was a male child. I won't go into all the details, but there's lots of other versions say it wasn't a male child at all, it was a female child, but let's just keep to this one version. The two women carried stones, spears, and hawk's down and bush cotton. Now, as soon as you hear that the two women were carrying stone spears, the Aboriginal listener will think, right, this is really strange, magical stuff, powerful stuff, because women don't normally carry spears. And also these women are covered in hawk's down. Well, that kind of decoration is reserved for initiated men in Australia, but these women seem to be doing these male things. They're decorated like men, they're carrying spears like men, and the next line, on the way they kill iguana, opossum and bandicoot for their food, so they're hunters. So already we can see the gender ambivalence here. They're doing men's work and they're carrying men's weapons and they're dressed like men. When they killed the animals, they gave them the names they bear today. They did the same for the yam. So these are clearly divine figures. They're rather like God in the Bible. They're making language. They're giving things their names for the very first time as they move. They gathered all the plants and animals that are in the Murngin country today. They said to each thing they killed or gathered, you will be marain by and by. So they kill the animal with a spear, and they make this prophecy that they speak to the animal. So you're killing a kangaroo, and you make a prophecy, you will be marain. That means you will soon be sacred. So they make this prophecy to the animals that they kill, that they will become marain, which means sacred, or possibly a better word would be totemic. You'll be a taboo, sacred, powerful animal, but you have to be killed first, is kind of part of the message. When the two sisters started their journey, they talked Jaun, later Rainbango, and still later Jinba. Then they talked Wabalak, and finally Lialaumia. They named the country as they went along. So this part of Australia is a patchwork of different linguistic groups, and to quite a large extent, actually, you have to marry somebody who speaks a different language, because if you marry somebody who speaks the same language, that will be incest. So you have these Mata and Mala groups, as they're called, kinship groups, which are, or rather local groups, which are associated with a particular language. And these sisters, they're moving across the landscape, creating these linguistic boundaries, as well as the various other boundaries they create, naming the country as they go along. In the Wawalak country, they copulated with Wawalak Wonga men. Now you hear this and you think, right, these must be very powerful, because they're allowed to have incest, apparently, which is about the most powerful privilege you can have. These men were Dua, and they were Dua. This was very wrong. The two women stopped to rest, for the younger felt the child she was carrying move inside her. She knew her baby would soon be born. "Yeppa, sister, I feel near my heart this baby turning," she said. The older one said, "Then let us rest." Need to stress here again, a listener would be impressed by the solidarity of these sisters, because in this part of Australia, when the records were being made, this was in the 30s, men weren't at all happy about women being with each other when they were giving birth. So a woman who was about to give birth, the male ideal, I'm not sure how ruthlessly it was carried out, but the male ideal was that she should just not make a fuss. She should just, she should go out digging like she normally does. The baby should sort of plop out, and she should come back as if nothing's happened, and she shouldn't have anyone with her to help her, not even her mother. Now, how much that is true in practice, supporting what James was saying the other day, I would like to know a little bit more about. But certainly the men say that a woman should be isolated when she's giving birth. So in this story, it couldn't be more opposite. These women are very, very intimate in birth giving, and so one massages the stomach of the other in order to help the baby come out. They sat down, and the older sister put her hand on the abdomen of the younger sister and felt the child moving inside. She then massaged her younger sister, for she knew her labour pains had commenced. The baby was born there. It was a Eurytia, for its mother was Dua. So if you're a woman, of course, in a system like this, your offspring have the opposite moiety, whereas the men's offspring have the same moiety. The country was still a part of the territory of the Wawalak clan. After the child was born, the older sister gathered more bush food, and the two moved on toward the sea. They stopped at various places and gave all of them names. They named all the clan territories and the localities within their borders. They first rested at Jiri Jiri, Quail Place, then at Wakangay, Crow Place, then Dunga Dunga, Fish Spear Place, and I went through all the different places they stopped. All these localities were Dua and were within the country of the Wawalak clan. And see how the story makes a real point of this. Although the Wawalak sisters went to almost all the clans of the Dua moiety, they never walked on the country of the Eurytia moiety. So you can imagine you're on a chessboard having to step across a white space to keep on your own space, which is the black. The sisters cannot have relationships with the opposite side, which is of course why they're incestuous. Because if you're forced to stick within Dua, including when you're having sex, then clearly you're going to be having sex with somebody from a Dua moiety, which makes that an incestuous relationship. "Come on, sister," said the older, "we'll go quickly now." They drank water at that last place and hurried on. They did not stop until they sat down at the great Mirmina, Rock Python's back, waterhole in the country of the Lilalomir clan. It is in the bottom of this well, in the deep subterranean waters, below the upper waters, that Yolungur, the great copper snake, the python totem of the Dua moiety, lives. They call the country for the first time Mirmina, which means Rock Python's back. So the sisters don't know that where they've stopped is the waterhole in which this massive python is lurking really deep, deep down. The older sister took a fire drill and made a fire. She started cooking all the yams and other bush food that she had gathered and all the animals that they killed on their journey. "Sister, you cook my food for me too," said the younger one. "Be patient," said the older. She then gathered some paper bark and fashioned a bed for her younger sister's newborn child. As she did this, she said, "By and by, sister, we must circumcise these two small sons of ours." "Yes, sister," said the younger. So even circumcision of boys by men is invented, if you like, or established by these two sisters who intended to circumcise their boys, but we'll see that they never got round to it because something rather extraordinary got in the way, happened instead. which of course you can see is also another form of initiation ritual, different from circumcision, but playing the same role, performing the same function. As soon as they cook the food, now here's the first, here now, the listener in North East Ireland will now begin to think, right, this is a really powerful place, they must have established themselves around, because strange things start to happen. As soon as they cooked the food, each animal and plant jumped out of the fire and ran to their Miramina waterhole and jumped into it. They all went into this Junguan and Gudubibi well. The Junguan and Gudubibi are the name of the rituals which reenact different parts of the story. The crab ran in first. When he did this, the two women talked Lialaumia for the first time. Before this, they had talked Wawalak. So have you see what's happening there? The normal thing is you kill an animal, and now it's raw meat, and then you put it in the fire, and it turns into cooked meat, and then you eat it. Everything seems to be going into a sort of action replay in reverse now, for some reason. The dead animals, instead of becoming cooked, they jump out of the fire and they become more than raw, they become alive. And not only just alive, but alive like humans. They walk on two legs. And as this happens, the language changes. So you have a switch between life and death, and a switch between one language and the neighbouring tongue. The other plants and animals follow the crab. The yams ran like men, as did the iguanas, frill-necked lizard, darpu, ovaku snake, rock python, seagulls, sea eagles, native companions, crocodiles. Each ran and dived into the clan's totemic well and disappeared from sight. Right, it's not quite stated explicitly here, but I can tell you now that all the other myths will make sense of this, because the rainbow snake is a composite. It's a kind of leviathan. The rainbow snake consists of a kind of a skin embracing all the different game animals which people want to hunt. And what's happening now is that instead of being able to hunt them, they're going into the waterhole and becoming sacred, fulfilling the prophecy which the sisters had made. You will be moraine by and by. So instead of being available for cooking and consumption, they're making themselves unavailable by kind of morphing into the snake, or a good way of putting it in the story is that the snake swallows them up. But you can see, can't you, if a snake's swallowing everything up, then the result is a composite of all the things which have been swallowed. So the rainbow snake is very, some of you may have surely heard of the notion common in many parts of the world, South America particularly, of the master of the game animals, the mistress of the game animals. There's no question, by the way, that the great caves of the Dordogne, when you see these bison and horses, they would have been, in those caves, going into them would have been an experience of initiation and revelation. And the boys, on being initiated, they would have seen with their own eyes, right, okay, what I've been told is true. There is the great bison, there is the great horse. These are the prototypical, immortal versions of the horse or the bison or the other animals, which protect the animals and make sure that when you're hunting, you are careful. You abide by a number of rules involving respect for the animal in different ways, or at least respect for the blood of the animal. So the rainbow snake is like another version of this idea of the guardian of the game animals. It's now taking the game animals away from the people who try to hunt them and rendering them moraine, which means sacred or totemic. The older woman went out to gather bark to make a bed for her sister's baby after it was born. She walked over some of the water of the Miramina well. Her menstrual blood fell in the totem well and was carried down the sacred clan waterhole where Yulunga, the big father, lives. When the menstrual blood dropped into the pool, Yulunga smelled the odour of this pollution from where he was lying in the black water beneath the floor of the totem well. His head was lying quietly on the bottom of the pit. He raised his head and smelled again and again. "Where does this blood come from?" he said. It reminds me of Jack of the Beanstalk. "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman." He opened the bottom of the well by throwing the stone which covers its base out of the well onto the land by the women's camp. This stone is near the camp today, and you can see it if you go there. It's now a snake's head. So once again, it's incidental, but there's no doubt in the story it must have happened. How else would that rock have got there? He crawled out slowly like a snake does from the well. When he came out, he sucked some of the well water into his mouth. He spat it into the sky. Soon a cloud about the size of a man's hand appeared from nowhere in the centre of the sky. As Yulunga slowly rose from the bottom of the pool, the totemic well water rose too and flooded the earth. Need to stress, right across the world you get the myth of Noah and his flood. It doesn't have to be Noah, of course, in other parts of the world, but you have a story of a massive flood. And it's kind of simple, because the end of the Ice Age meant massive floods everywhere, huge real floods. But we need to recognise that historical fact of the rising of the sea levels and the causing of floods needs to become mythological and connected up with another flood. And that's the monthly flood of women having their menstrual periods. And you get the conflation of the menstrual flow with this massive flood, which is a historical thing in the stories of the rainbow snake. The totemic well water rose too and flooded the earth. He pulled himself up on the stone which he had thrown and laid his head there. He looked around him. He saw the women and their babies. Really crucial. Now the next line. Yulunga was older brother to these women, and they were sisters to him. Their children were his wakus, and he was Gawel to them. Very significant, because the snake is officially the protector of the sisters and their children. Because in Aboriginal kinship systems, your main protector will be your mother's brother. The snake is the mother's brother. Eating his sisters and sister children, according to the story. So what we have to do, we have to work out what's going on here, remembering at all times that these are sacred stories during the course of which ritual secrets are divulged to initiated people, and there's always a difference between the inside and the outside meanings of the stories. When you've been initiated, you get the inside meanings. If you haven't been initiated, and most anthropologists at the best are half initiated or quite a bit initiated, but I'm not sure all the anthropologists were as initiated as they might have been. But if you're not initiated, you get the outside meaning, and the outside meaning is a lot more negative than the inside meaning. So the outside meaning is very frightening. The menstrual blood is polluting the well. The Great Father is angry and is going to punish the sisters. We'll come to this later. The inside meaning is exactly the opposite. The inside meaning for the men who get initiated is being inside the belly of that snake is the safest place you can possibly be. No one can harm you when you're in the belly of that snake. Just like those animals, when they're in the snake, they're safe from being cooked and eaten. Yulunga continued to look at them. He hissed. This was to call out for rain. There was no cloud in the sky until then, but soon the two sisters saw a very small, black cloud appear in the heavens. They didn't see the great python lying there watching them. The cloud grew larger and larger. So imagine this sort of scariness of it. It's like beautiful sunny day, blue skies, little cotton wool clouds, and then there's this black cloud, and it seems to be quite small, but it's directly over you, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it seems to have got it in for you, It seems to be, have some kind of intent. And then you realise, it's the flood starting, the terrible rains start to fall. The cloud grew larger and larger, and soon the rain came down. The Wabalek sisters hurriedly built a house to be ready for the rain. They named the forked sticks they used as uprights. The women went inside the house. They did not know where this rain had come from. They did not know that the older sister's menstrual blood had defiled the Miramina waterhole and had made Yulunga angry. The Wabalek women went to sleep, but the rain poured down harder and harder and awakened them. The Gungwan said, "Sister, where does this rain come from? There's no cloud in the north or south, and there's no cloud in the east or west, but over us is this huge black cloud. I think something is wrong. I think something terrible is going to happen." She got up and went outside. The younger one stayed within the house and sang. The Gungwan beat the ground with her yam stick. She knew now that Yulunga was going to swallow her, and she wanted to stop the rain. She sang, "Yulunga, don't you come out and swallow us. We are good, we are clean." While she sang, she danced around the house. The two sisters then called out the taboo names of the Miramina well. So this is a kind of rain dance, but it's a rain dance in reverse. They're dancing, so the myth tells us, to stop the rain. What actually happens is that the more they dance, the more powerful is the downpour of rain. So once again, you've got an ambivalence. Is this a rain dance? Is the rain coming because the sisters are menstruating and dancing? Or is what's happening despite the intentions of the sisters? There's no doubt what the men's interpretation is. The men's interpretation is that the poor women haven't a clue what's going on. They didn't even notice there was a snake there. They didn't notice they dropped menstrual blood into the pool. And they don't, they're trying to do something which is futile, because the more they sing and dance, the more it has the opposite effect of the one they want. The more the rain's pour down. While the older sister sang and danced around the house, and the younger sister sang inside it to stop the rain from coming down and to drive the great cloud away, they were being surrounded by all the snakes in the land. This is another rather terrifying thing. There are lots of these pythons on different islands and different inlets and estuaries, these water snakes. But now they all begin to connect up. And they start to perform a kind of snaky entanglement of a mass. And eventually, we'll see in a moment, they sing out with one thunderous voice, almost as if they speak one language, all these different snakes, each snake attached to a different part of the territory, a different island maybe, or because this part of Australia, I don't know if anyone knows the map, it's full of inlets, estuaries, islands, and is periodically flooded during the monsoon season. While the older sister sang and danced around the house, and the younger sister sang inside it to stop the rain from coming down and to drive the great cloud away, they were being surrounded by all the snakes in the land, the pythons, death adders, tree snakes, black snakes, iguanas, the blue-tongued lizards, snails, caterpillars. And And all the dewar snakes came up around them in a circle, for they heard the call of their father Yulunga. It was night, and the women didn't see them. Again, it would be strange if it wasn't night. You need darkness for these kinds of things to happen. For the snake to be powerful, it has to be wet and dark, and anything dry or sunny or fiery is going to have the opposite effect. The Gungwan first sang all the songs now sung in the general camp. I just need to describe this. What Warner says, what the anthropologist says, is an Aboriginal camp that consists of concentric circles. And around the outside, the very outside, is the area for rubbish people. Rubbish people means women and children who haven't been initiated. A little bit further inwards, there's you initiated people, but you're not really strongly initiated. And there's a few more. So to right the very, very middle is the old men who've been initiated so many times that they're used to dying. And when death comes along, they think, "Oh, we've been here before." But they're in the very middle of this circle. They have the most taboo songs. So what the two sisters are doing, they think, well, we'll try to make the rain go away. We'll sing some rather weak songs, and then if that doesn't work, we'll try some stronger ones, and we'll see what the strongest song of all is. So they sang all the songs sung in the general camp during the Gunabibi. These are the less powerful songs. She did this first, for she thought they would stop the rain, but it did not stop. She's afraid of this rain, for it came out of a cloud she could not understand, because this cloud had come from nowhere. She sang then the taboo songs of the Jungwan. Kat, ye! She sang the songs when the subsection names are called out in the Jungwan. She took the dewar subsections first. This is I'll talk about this perhaps after the tea break, because it'll take up too much time. We won't finish the myth. But that's a 3D version of an Australian Aboriginal a Randa system, actually, but it's an 8-section system. And the sections are for purposes of marital relationships. So a young man, on thinking about getting married isn't quite the right word, they don't really have weddings, but anyway, having a legitimate sexual relationship, all the women of your generation will be divided into 8 categories. And you can only choose a woman from one out of those 8. And that woman's will be your mother's brother's daughter's daughter. You might think it's a bit restrictive, but luckily the system stretches across the entire landscape, so you actually can have sex with an 1/8 of all the women of your generation, because in each of these categories there'll be kind of an indefinite number of people. But it's still, if it's anything other than that mother's brother's daughter's daughter, it's incest. So what's happening in this story is that the sisters are shouting out the names of these sections or subsections. So she took the dewar, in other words, she's inaugurating the entire system of kinship. The younger sister, she took the dewar subsections first. The younger sister sang like the leader of the Jungwan ceremony does today. In other words, she's doing exactly what only a very highly initiated man would be allowed to do today. This woman is doing it. She kept time with the singing sticks. She said, "We'll turn to the Eurytia subsections now. We'll call out the Eurytia people subsections." So, but she actually, it's the only time it's mentioned that she does anything to do with the Eurytia. But someone's going to create the Eurytia, and so these are the only sisters around at this time. They're the culture heroes before everyone else has been born. So she has to make the Eurytia as well. They sang the Gama songs first, for they are not strong and belong to the camp of the women. Then they sang the songs of the Mandiyela, for it's only a little more powerful and its songs are only slightly more taboo. Then they sang Junguan and Ulmark, so they're getting closer and closer to the deep male secrets as they sing these songs. The rain continued and came down harder and harder. They decided that they must sing something even more powerful, more taboo, and deeper within the ceremonial camp of the men. They sang Yolunga and menstrual blood. So just think about it. You have to go right into the deepest male secret to find menstrual blood. And if you link the word menstrual blood with Yolunga, you've done it. That collision between blood and the snake is going to do what needs to be done. They sang Yolunga and menstrual blood. When Yolunga heard these words, he crawled into the camp of the two women and their two children. They had suddenly fallen into a deep sleep from his magic. He licked the women and children all over preparatory to swallowing them. He bit the noses of each and made the blood come, as if he hadn't got enough blood. And you need a bit more blood. Bite the noses. Chris Lowe was telling us about the Bushmen people a few weeks ago, and of course the Bushmen have the Eland Bull dance. And in the Eland Bull dance, everyone, this is in southern Africa, in the Kalahari, everyone moves from this creation, which is second creation, into first creation. And it happens when a girl menstruates. And what happens is that when she menstruates, when she sheds her blood, she's going to go into first creation, quite a dangerous journey, and she needs everyone with her. So we were hearing about from a particular ethnographer, more next week. Camilla's going to say more. All right, mustn't say too much about Camilla's lecture next week. But a man has to go around cutting everyone's ear, because everyone has to bleed with the bleeding girl. Then you all go into a first creation together. A girl mustn't be on her own when she goes into the other world. You must all go with her, and for that you need blood. So the snake's doing another version of that. He bit the noses of each and made the blood come. It does matter, but you'll find all across the world that when men need to menstruate, and they do, to have power, they'll have to cut themselves one way or the other. Either the penis, the arm, the ears, the nose. It's not easy for men to menstruate, but you can always find a way. These are some of the different ways. He swallowed the old woman first, the Wurkel next, and the little boys last. He waited for daylight. When dawn came, he uncoiled and went out a short distance to the bush because he was too near the water. He wanted to leave the women in a dry place. So can you see what's happening? When the snake's swallowing the women, it's in the wet. But if you want to regurgitate the women, you don't want wet around. You want to find a dry place. So the separation of women from the snake, their dispersal, if you like, into individual human beings requires the dry. What the flood does is it merges humans into one composite Leviathan or monster or snake. Right, let's get back to my original text here. He raised himself and stood very straight. In the commentary they say he was just like a huge erect penis reaching right up to the sky. He was like the trunk of a very tall straight tree. His head reached as high as a cloud. When he raised himself to the sky, the flood waters came up as he did. They flooded and covered the entire earth. No tree or hill showed above them. I mean, when you read the story of Noah and his flood, I don't know, you just think, well, it's a brilliant, wonderful, extraordinary story, but this Aboriginal story just gets a lot more detail in it, and it makes what's happening a lot more clear. Of course, in the Noah story, of course, it's all about meat. You have to remember the reason why God sent the flood was because he's fed up with people killing and eating animals without making a proper offering of the meat to God, and that's why the flood came. So there's no.
Got that detail.
Yeah, that's right. Camilla forgot her details. Great. Right. So, and of course, as everyone knows, the story of Noah and his ark has got a rainbow. The rainbow is the covenant between man and God. That the flood won't come again unless we misbehave again, which maybe we are rather likely to do.
Over time.
Well, we got to... Okay, they flooded and covered the entire earth. No tree or hill showed above them. When he fell later, the water receded, and at the same time there was dry ground. While he was high in the sky and had the 2 women and children inside him, he sang all the Mandiela, Junguan, Gunabi, and Ulmark ceremonies. In some of the other versions, when the snake's up in the sky, they put it rather differently. They say the sisters were singing when they were being swallowed by the snake, and they carried on singing when they were inside the snake. And if you listen carefully, during a thunderstorm, you can hear them still singing inside from inside the snake. You can hear the voices of those 2 sisters. Pretty loud voice, sounds like thunder. The other Wonga Wurtits, which means totemic python, stood up too. They were all dua, as Yulunga was, and none was Yiritia. Yulunga was higher than all the rest. He was the leader for those other snakes and was more powerful than they. Now here comes a rather funny conversation between the snakes. Some of you will know, if you've read my book, I know not everyone's read my book, but one of the fundamental rules of hunters and gatherers is that if you've killed an animal, you can't really keep it for yourself. I called it, in my book, the own kill rule, the obligation to share an animal that you killed yourself. And you can put it another way. You can say that if you kill an animal and eat it all by yourself, that's almost like the ultimate sin, but it's actually linked conceptually with incest. So to kill an animal which is intimately yours and consume it is like having sex with your own child. It's as bad as that, if you like. So what you should do is you should give away your meat, just like you give away your relatives for other people to enjoy sexually. So anyway, that's slightly an aside. But this snake's now having an argument about who's been eating their own flesh, who's been too incestuous, if you like. So the Western Island python raised himself up. "What is your language?" he said. "I'm Lialaumir. What is yours?" "I'm Parango Yarnungu." Hopeless pronunciation, I'm sure, with all these words. "What is yours?" Yulunga then said to the python on the Howard Island mainland. "I'm Liagaumir." "What is yours?" he asked the Banyan Island python. "I'm Karmalanga language. My country is Kolpayunala." So each of these islands, in real life, they speak a different language. And so the snake is the embodiment of the collective on each of these islands, and each snake naturally has a different language. So, and what the story is, this now kind of merges into the Tower of Babel story a bit, because the Tower of Babel story is about just after the flood in the Bible. People tried to reach the sky in order to commune with God, and at that time everyone spoke one language, and then unfortunately they didn't make it. God wasn't too happy about things and told them to stay where they were. As a result, everything collapsed and everyone was speaking different languages. Well, a very similar motif in this story here. The sisters have invented language, and the snakes are now discovering that they all speak different languages. So the Mandel, Puili, Wawalak, Boon, Jilin, Kalpu, Marango, Japu, Jawak, and all Dua clans were asked by Yulunga what their language was, and each answered the language of his country. The Miramina snake said then, "I see we all talk different languages. It would be better if we talked the same tongue. We can't help this now. It is better then that we all have our ceremonies together, for we do own the same moraine." They all sang out together then, and their voices were as thunder and roared all over the land and sea. So in the voice of the thunder, in the language of ritual, which is at a core level the language of blood, they do have one language, even though the verbal languages have become differentiated. So they can all understand one another in this much more powerful ritual language, which is also the sound of thunder. The python wonga still stood on their tails high in the sky. The great Yulunga, this is the unkill bit, the great Yulunga turned to a Daidua snake. He said, "What have you been eating?" "I've been eating freshwater fish, Dua variety." "How did he taste?" "Oh, he's very good, nice and fat." "What are you going to do now that you've eaten him?" "Oh, I'm going to spew him up and look at him, and then I'm going to eat him again for the last time." He was going to do what the live pythons do now. They eat something, swallow it, spew it up, lick it, and eat it again. It does not come up again. Yulunga now asked the Japu python what he had eaten. "I ate a wallaby, Dua moiety. I'm going to let him out." And inquired of the others. The Marango snake had eaten a small plains bird, the Kalpu a sand crab, Jirin a green sea turtle. I'll go through shellfish, honey, various other things, mostly animals, wet animals. All of the snakes of the Duo clan were asked. Western Island snake was asked last. He is second highest and only lower in rank than Mirrormina snake. What have you been eating? The Lialaumia snake asked the Western Island one. I won't tell you. Come on, tell me. I have heard lightning and thunder and wind in your country. Something has happened there. You give me something and I'll tell you. Come on, you and I are brothers. Remember I call you brother? If I tell you, you must tell me, because I call you Wawa, older brother, and you call me Yuku Yuku, younger brother, just as you said. I'll tell you then. I've eaten parrotfish. What colour? Blue. What kind of teeth? White. What you've eaten is no good. Why didn't you eat iguana or stone kangaroo? But what did you eat? Replied the Western Island snake. I won't tell you. Why not? The Mirrormina snake raised itself higher and higher into the sky. He laid his neck and head on a cloud. His eyes shot lightning. He felt ashamed. Come on, tell me, my big brother, said the Western Island snake again. The Western Island snake continued to insist, and his head came closer and closer as his body writhed across the clouds toward the Mirrormina python. He was very angry. After a long time, Yulunga said, I ate 2 sisters and a small boy and girl. When he said this, the southeastern monsoon started blowing from off the land. As it did this, the head of the Western Island snake hurriedly pulled back to its own well. This is a dry wind, and all the snakes have to retreat from it, going to where they could find water. The wind had stopped him from coming further. He wanted to make a waterway from Western Island to Mirrormina. Yulunga roared and fell to the ground at the same time. When he fell, he split the ground open and made the present dance ground at the Lialaumia ceremonial place. So you see this great cleft in the land when you have the rituals. Again, you know, how could that have got there if it wasn't for the story being true, and the great snake crashing to the ground and splitting the earth open. He lay there on the ground and thought, those 2 sisters and their children are dead inside me now. Yulunga started cleansing his mouth with his cheeks and tongue. He spat several times. He said to his sons, I'm going to spew. He regurgitated the 2 women and the little boys and dropped them on an ant's nest. If you think of the landscape, you've got symmetrical opposites. You've got holes in the ground, deep wells full of water, and then you've got very, very dry things, and these are the termite nests which come upwards. And the Aborigines would use these termite nests with the lovely dry crumbling earth to make earth ovens. So the idea was that you cook the meat in the dry, and the meat ants probably helped cook as well. They did a bit of their if you fall into a termite's nest, of course you get cooked in a different way with very hot stinging termites. But anyway, you get this distinction between the dryness, the super dry of a termite's nest, and the super wet of a waterhole. And if you want to regurgitate women so that they come alive again, you must get it right. You must make sure they land on the termite's nest. The Western Island snake, when he heard what Yulunga said, was disgusted. You've eaten your own wakus and yeppas, he said. This was a terrible thing. You've eaten your own sisters and sisters' children. The Wonga Yulunga crawled slowly back to his waterhole. He went inside but kept his head up to watch. At this time, the Yulunga totemic trumpet came out of the well and lay beside him. No one brought it out and no one blew it, but it sang out like it does now. Quite an important detail, that. When the Aborigines perform the ritual, they have to have this big, what the anthropologists call a trumpet. It's like a long hollow log, and they blow raspberries down it. But it's quite difficult to blow. You've got to learn how to do it. And the story is saying that originally it wasn't difficult at all. It played itself. It's only when the men have taken over the rituals that it all gets rather complicated and difficult. You've got to be trained and learn and all these things. But originally, in the dream time, when women were doing these things, everything worked more magically. No one brought it out and no one blew it, but it sang out like it does now. The Yulunga trumpet nearly finished the myth. The Yulunga trumpet blew over the 2 women and their 2 sons. They were lying there like they'd fainted. Some green ants came out then and bit the women and children. They jumped. The trumpet continued to walk around while the Wonga Yulunga looked on. The women and children were alive again, and he had thought them dead. He picked up 2 singing sticks and crawled out of the waterhole. Before he emerged, he called all his sons who were in the well and put these true snakes, lizards and snails on his head and neck. That's probably the clearest indication, when the snake's got all his creatures around him, forming on him as he comes out of the water, that we're dealing with a composite being. This python swallowing everything up and containing all these other creatures. He hit the mothers and their babies on their heads with the sticks and swallowed them again. He meant to keep them down this time. He felt sick again, for once more he had swallowed Dua people. He decided to stand straight up. When he raised up, the Mandalpui snake shouted, "What did you eat?" Bandicoot, he lied. You do not tell the truth. All right then. 2 Dure women and 2 Uritti boys. I said, oh, all right, then I put that in myself. But anyway, 2 Dure women and 2 Uritti boys. No, I'm reading it all out from Warner. When he said this, he fell again. This time he made the Gunabibi and Ulmark dance grounds by his fall. After his fall, he crawled out into the Lialamere well and went down into the subterranean waters. He put a stone over his entrance to stop the flood of water that had been coming out. He swam in the underground waters to the Wabalak country, for he wanted to take the mothers and children back to their own country. Here he spat them out for the last time. He left them there and came back to his own country. The 2 women turned to stone, and one can still see them in the Wabalak country today. Yulunga kept the boys inside him, for they were Eurytia and he was Dua. So if you're eating somebody else's flesh, you can keep it in your stomach. It's only if it's incest, your own flesh, that you have to regurgitate. So if you've eaten Eurytia, that's fine, but if you've eaten Dua, it has to come out again. The 2 women did not circumcise their 2 sons as they intended, because Yulunga had interfered before they were ready. It was because they so intended and said for other people to perform this act that people cut their sons today. So in this part of Australia, the men, if you like, menstruate, and they call it menstruation. It's not me saying that. They say this is menstruation when they cut their arms. So the boy going through the initiation ritual has his arm cut, or and one of the elders who's in charge of the ritual would maybe have his old wounds opened of the arm, and they'll pour the blood onto the boy, saying that while doing that they're reenacting what the sisters did during the dream time. Okay, this is the final part of the story, and this is man learns the secrets of the Creator Sisters rituals. So this is one of a vast number of what are often called matriarchy myths. Myths which say that originally women ruled, or at least women monopolized ritual power, and then they lost it. And that was because men stole the power from women. And again you'll find that the power which women lose and which men steal is the power of the blood, the power of menstruation, childbirth, and all the magic which goes with that. Women still have that capacity, they still give birth, but in these parts of Australia which are male-dominated, women are not supposed to get together while doing those sort of things, and they're certainly not supposed to get any symbolic power from menstruation or childbirth. Why not? Because that would be at the expense of the male power which men get from their version of synchronized menstruation and synchronized childbirth. Perhaps I should just explain. Aboriginal Australian men not only menstruate but give birth. It's a bit difficult to do it, but you've got to have some raw material, of course, and the raw material comes from women. So women give birth to actual boys, and when they reach 9 or 10, the rainbow snake ritual begins, and the men take these boys from women, often with quite a struggle. With the women, perform a kind of ritual resistance to having their children robbed from them, but inevitably the women lose. And then what happens is that the boys are dunked in a big womb, a big hole in the ground, covered in lots of blood from the men. And then after maybe two months or so, the boys are reborn, and they're allowed to go back to their mothers, this time with a whole lot of secrets which they're not allowed to divulge to their mothers. But this last part of the story is explaining how men, according to the Aborigines, acquired the crucial secrets, all the secrets which matter to make fertility, to make the world go round, to make the seasons come, to make the animals fertile. All those secrets, not just some of them, all of them came from women, and men had to learn them from these ancestral women. So while all this great drama was being acted out in the country of the Lialaumia, 2 Wabalak Wongar men, this means men who are sort of a bit wobbly, not maybe a bit effeminate, maybe a bit animal-like. They're still Wonga. They haven't crystallized out as proper men yet, but anyway, they're probably incestuous. 2 Wabalak Wonga men had heard the terrible noise of the snake's voice, all that thunder, and they'd seen the skies fill with lightning, and they felt the downpour of the rain. They knew something was the matter, so they followed the 2 women's tracks. It took them many days and nights to get there. They finally saw the snake track. "I think the sisters had trouble," said one. "I think that maybe a crocodile or python has killed them." They arrived at Miramina. They had followed the Goida River down. They saw all the ants walking around everywhere, like they smelled something that was dead and they wanted to eat. They then found all the snake tracks. The well water shone like a rainbow. When they saw this, they knew there was a snake in there. They went farther in the bush and saw the ceremonial ground where Yulunga's fall had made the dance places. "Wonga python has been here," they said. When they looked carefully at the stone, they found blood from the heads of the 2 women and boys. Remember when they had their noses bitten? What will we do? Run and get some paper bark and make a basket, said the older Wabalek man. They gathered 2 baskets of blood and went to the dance grounds. They made a bush house on part of the ground that represents the snake's tail. You take all the hawk's feathers, bush cotton and this blood, and we'll paint ourselves. You do this, and I shall go cut a hollow log and make a Yolunga trumpet. Each did his task. A hollow ridge pole from the Wabalek sister's house was used for the trumpet totemic emblem of Yolunga. The sun went down. They left the blood till morning. They slept. And while they were in a deep sleep, they dreamed of what the 2 women sang and danced when they were trying to keep Yolunga from swallowing them. The Wabalek women came back as spirits and taught the 2 men the Junguan songs and dances that are for the outside general camp and the inside ones that are for the men's camp. They told the men the way to do the Mandyela, the Gunabibi, and the Ulmark ceremonies. They sang Yolunga and Muit. These are the 2 names, secret names for the snake. The men slept on and dreamed that Yolunga brought out all the iguanas from the Mirimina well. The 2 sisters said to men, "This is all now. We are giving you this dream so you can remember these important things. You must never forget these things we have told you tonight. You must remember every time, each year, these songs and dances. You must paint with blood and feathers for Mandyela, Gunabibi and Junguan. You must dance all the things we saw and named on our journey and which ran away into the well." After the men danced the new dances and ceremonies for the first time, they went back to their own country. And then finally, we have this statement from the informant to the anthropologist, Lloyd Warner, who says, "We dance these things now because our Wongar ancestors learned them from the 2 Wabalek sisters." And perhaps just read out a little bit. I'm going to end in a moment. What happens in the ritual reenactments is a battle of the sexes, actually. In parts of northeast Arnhem Land, it's not quite as simple as just male dominance. What happens is that the women have their own name for the snake, and in the area that Ronald and Catherine Burnt studied, which is not at all far from where Warner studied, the snake is more female. And the women have more power, and there's a real living tussle between the women and the men. So the women actually, at a high point of the initiation ritual, what happens is that the women, painted up with ochre, invade the men's apparently secret sacred ground, and the men are they're really cautious. They mustn't look at these women. If the men look at the women directly, what will happen to the men was they will get pregnant. The men will get pregnant, so they don't want that. So they hardly dare look at the women. But what the women do, according to the Burnts, the women just grab a man. The women just grab, okay, I want you, I want you, I want you. They grab, especially the younger men, and they have sex with them on the dance ground, and they're in the relationship of younger brothers to them. And it's only once this climax of the ritual has been performed, with the women having symbolically incestuous sex, that it's felt appropriate for the men to have their say. So just I'll just read this out. This is from my book, but it's quoting Burnt. 2 or 3 nights before the finale of the Kunapipi at Yirrkala, after the boys have passed through the core of their Kunapipi experience in being swallowed into the uterus of the mother, so the boys get, the boys are. Apparently they urinate themselves. They're so scared. They just think they hear this shrill sound. They hear the bull roars. They smell all this blood. They're blindfolded, and they think their last moment's come. And what happens is that they're covered in blood, and they hear these terrible screeching sounds, and it goes on for night after night after night. But they finally come out of it. So 2 or 3 nights before this finale, all the women dance into the men's sacred ground. Those of you who've read Colin Turnbull's The Forest People about the Alima will remember the climax of one of those stories about how the Malima fire is supposed to be entirely controlled by men, but Turnbull describes how the women seem to be unaware of this particular rule and completely take over the whole space, which is supposed to be men. Of course, Jerome has talked about this with the Benjeli, how the women have Nigoku, and the women charge into the central camp area, and all the men kind of have to scamper, and it's only when the women have had their powerful presence made made very, very tangibly felt that they let the men kind of take over. So all the women dance into the men's sacred ground. Some are painted with red ochre and decorated to dance for coitus. This is incestuous coitus. It must embody the blood unity which is the snake. It is the women themselves who now hold the power, invading the men's sacred ground and forming themselves into a snake of their own. The men sit down quietly with heads bent because they don't want to get pregnant. It is only once this snake power of the women themselves has been established that conditions are felt appropriate for the climax of the ceremony, collective and incestuous sexual intercourse within the dance ground or symbolic womb. Catherine Burnt, Ronald Burnt, they make it very clear this isn't just symbolic sex. They actually have sex. Durkheim mentions that as well in Elementary Forms of Religious Life. Of course, it's difficult for anthropology to discuss this because, if you say it too openly, you get all the missionaries complaining that it's devil worship and all kinds of stuff. So there are all kinds of ambivalence about being too explicit about these things. But I think it's important to remember, without any shame or embarrassment, what the Aborigines prided themselves on being able to do. These rituals are obviously absolutely crucial to their survival in that often rather harsh environment. Following this genuine flesh and blood return to the women, you can see what it means. You're a young man, and you're returned to the uterus of the mother, and the way that happens is that some older woman starts having sex with you. It's
reenacting the role of the story.
And it's reenacting the story. Sorry, I should be very, very clear. In the story, the sisters always take a younger brother to have sex with. So it's not, some dominant male having sex with you. It's you, as a woman, exercising your rights over your younger siblings at a time, by the way, when you can't get pregnant, because if you're menstruating, you're not likely to really get pregnant. Anyway,
the actual
I want to just
ritual of fucking is real and symbolic at the same time.
There's certainly no doubt about it, it's symbolic, but I mean, sometimes if you say symbolic, you mean it doesn't really happen. Here it's symbolic, it's suffused with symbolic and ritual power, but it really happens. So it's not just...
And there's no reason why it shouldn't be both.
Of course not. No. Sorry. It's certainly symbolic, but sometimes when people say, "Oh, it's just symbolic," they mean nothing really happens. It's just symbolic. It really happens. Okay. So Burnt's male informants observe, in words which seem to display astonishing consciousness of the fact that this is something which women should really be doing. And this is a quote from this is a different informant from Warner's. This is from Ronald Burnt. This is how the men see what they've been doing. And when I read this, I think, why don't all the anthropologists listen? These Aborigines, they know more about their rituals and their myths than the European anthropologists coming from America or somewhere trying to interpret them. Why don't people just listen to what the Aborigines actually say? Because maybe they know more about what's happening than these foreigners do. So here we have an Aborigine who, in my view, says it. And what's so annoying is that this gets written down and people say, "Oh, well, he can't really mean it, must be symbolic." So here's what he says. "But really, we have been stealing what belongs to them, the women, for it is mostly all woman's business, and since it concerns them, it belongs to them. Men have nothing to do, really, except copulate. It belongs to the women. All that belonging to those Wabbala, the baby, the blood, the yelling, their dancing, all that concerns the women. But every time we have to trick them. Women can't see what men are doing, although it really is their own business, but we can see their side. This is because all the dreaming business came out of women. Everything. Only men take picture for that Yulungu. They're using the metaphor of a camera. Take picture, they mean men make a replica of the real rainbow snake. In the beginning, we had nothing, because men had been doing nothing. We took these things from women. So my view on these stories is that then, if you say, well, are the myths true? They're talking about a dreamtime past. Can it be science? And I'm saying, well, the stories are not designed to be about some distant past. The men are here and now doing what they're describing. The men are menstruating artificially, but with an enormous amount of power. The men are benefiting from the power of childbirth collectively, while at an extreme, not always of course, but denying that power to women. So the myths are descriptions of what the men are doing now, never mind the past. So of course they're accurate. When the men say we're stealing all this from women, I'm just thinking, well, I mean, what other theory can he possibly have? Can he think that men invented menstruation, or men invented menstrual synchrony, or men invented getting power from childbirth? It doesn't make any sense. Of course men are stealing these things from women. So why not listen to the men's account of these stories and take those interpretations seriously? Right, we need a tea break because I've gone on a little bit longer than I should have done. So, tea break.